Adrian arrived at the Crescent Hotel as evening dragged its shadow across Eureka Springs. The town looked abandoned, streets folding into mist, lamps buzzing as though exhausted from holding the dark at bay. The hotel rose on the hill like a witness unwilling to leave, its walls soaked in history, its windows lit with a faint glow too dim to be welcoming. He pushed through the revolving door. It turned with a heavy sigh, like exhaling after years of holding breath. The lobby opened before him, wide and hushed. Chandeliers dangled overhead, trembling faintly though no wind moved. The carpet smelled of polish and old rain, carrying the memory of countless steps that had ended here. Somewhere in the corner, a grandfather clock swung its pendulum in silence, motion without sound, time without progress. Adrian glanced at his wristwatch. The second hand hovered stubbornly, unwilling to march forward. He tapped the glass, but time refused to listen. The receptionist waited behind the desk. She smiled, though her eyes looked tired from holding the shape too long. "Welcome back, Mr. Adrian," she said, her voice smooth as glass. He hesitated. Back. He had never been here before. Yet correcting her felt dangerous, like waking someone who might not be sleeping. Instead, he accepted the pen she offered. The registry lay open, pages filled with names that all leaned in the same careful handwriting. His eyes froze at the bottom, his own name glistening in wet ink, as if written only moments ago. The woman slid a brass key toward him. "Room 218, she said softly, her tone rehearsed but deliberate. Her glove brushed his hand. Her touch left behind a cold echo that refused to fade. Guests in that room often stay longer than expected. He pocketed the key and turned toward the staircase. The banister was polished by centuries of hands, its wood warm, though no heat lived in the hall. The stairs groaned with each step, not randomly but rhythmically, as though they kept count of him. Halfway up, he paused. From the lobby below rose a low murmur. Not words, not music, only the suggestion of voices trapped between walls. He looked back. The receptionist remained still, her smile frozen, her lips unmoving. Yet the murmur continued. On the second floor, the hallway stretched like a throat. Portraits lined the walls, stern men, pale women, children whose painted eyes caught him no matter where he walked. Their gazes shifted subtly when he looked away, polite in their haunting. The lamps buzzed overhead, but the glow felt borrowed, as though the bulbs relied on something older than electricity. He stopped at 218. The number plate shone too brightly, polished over and over until it seemed new, though the door's frame sagged with exhaustion. Adrian lifted the key, but before it touched the lock, a knock came from the inside. One polite tap, a pause, then another, steady, patient. His chest tightened. Surely a staff member? Another guest? But the corridor remained silent behind him, stretching empty in both directions. Only the portraits watched. He placed his ear against the door. From within, he swore he felt warmth, like the heat of breath against skin. The knob burned cold when he touched it. He whispered, "It's just a room." He didn't believe it. The lock clicked easily. The door opened onto darkness that smelled of damp linen and faint antiseptic. The air pressed forward, greeting him like something alive. Slowly, shapes emerged. A bed neatly made, a dresser with a fractured mirror, curtains drawn too tight against the night. He stepped inside. The door shut with a soft finality. The mirror showed his reflection, late, uncertain, lagging half a heartbeat behind him. He raised a hand. His image followed only after hesitation, as though deciding whether to obey. From beneath the floor came a pulse, steady, mechanical, alive. The entire room seemed to breathe in slow rhythm. His body matched its pace before he realized. Adrian set the brass key on the dresser. It stuck briefly to his palm as if reluctant to leave, before resting with quiet weight. The mattress accepted him when he sat, shaping itself as though remembering. He looked to the window. Pulling the curtains apart revealed the town, frozen and empty, houses unlit, streets unmoving. A dog stood in the road, mouth open in a bark that carried no sound. He turned to the mirror again. Behind him, in its fractured glass, stood a figure, tall, blurred, waiting beside the bed. Adrian spun around. No one. The room was still. Yet when his eyes returned to the mirror, the figure had taken a step closer. It did not threaten. It waited, patient as the knock that began again, soft and certain, from the wrong side of the door. Adrian closed the door behind him and tried to believe he was alone. The air of room 218 carried an old sweetness, like perfume forgotten in a drawer, mixed with damp plaster and something faintly metallic. Curtains stirred, though the windows were sealed shut. His suitcase waited by the bed, a suitcase he did not remember carrying up the stairs. The tag bore his name in a hand too elegant to be his own. The bedspread sagged in the shape of a body already departed. When he touched it, cold pressed back into his palm. The mirror on the dresser fractured his reflection, dividing him into late gestures and hesitant smiles. He lifted his hand. The man in the mirror followed, but with a delay that felt deliberate, as though testing how much of him it controlled. From the wardrobe came a knock. Not loud, soft, courteous 3 times. He opened the doors. Only a coat hung inside, black wool, sleeves too long, its lining stitched with dates like entries in a calendar. Rainwater dripped from its hem, though the night outside was dry. He closed the doors quickly, but the knock continued once more, as if from deeper within. The coat swayed gently even after the door shut, as though breathing. The bathroom offered no safety. The mirror showed the door behind him standing open, though he had locked it. A pale hand lingered on the frame, fingers curved like hooks. When he turned, the door was still closed. In the glass, it stayed ajar. He ran the faucet, but instead of water came a warm breath scented like earth freshly dug. Pipes groaned with something that sounded like a heartbeat. Back in the bedroom, footsteps circled outside. They paused at his door. A key twisted in the lock from the other side. His own key lay visible on the dresser. The knob moved once, then stopped, as if whoever stood there was reconsidering ownership. The steps retreated, but slowly, like someone certain they would return. A faint humming followed, tuneless, a voice rehearsing patience. The mattress dipped beside him, sheets folded as though accepting weight. He stared, throat tight, while the space next to him curved in the outline of a body. His laugh came out thin. A second laugh answered half a second later, softer, sadder. He stood quickly. The indentation remained. The smell of damp earth rose from the depression in the mattress, clinging to the air like breath from soil. The mirror refused a single reality. One pane showed him standing, another displayed him lying silent on the bed, a third revealed the room without him at all. He touched the glass, and a cold palm pressed back. The contact felt medical, precise, cataloging his pulse. A faint smudge remained where the other hand had been, shaped like 5 long fingers, but on his side of the glass. From the ceiling, a new knock descended. Slow, pacing from corner to corner. Dust sifted down like ash. The rhythm ended, replaced by whispers of his name, first clear, then tangled until the syllables sounded like a question instead of a call. The whisper bent his name into shapes of other words. Guest, ghost, gone. He fled into the corridor, but the hallway had changed. Lamps spaced farther apart, wallpaper peeled like skin, portraits turned to face the wall. The carpet pulsed faintly under his shoes. Alive. From far away, an elevator bell chimed, though no elevator came. He slammed the door and found the lock sliding into place on its own. He pressed his ear to the wood. Something pressed back from the other side, imitating his posture, breathing with him. He pulled back the curtains. No street outside, only another hallway stretching into dim light. At the far end, a figure advanced carrying a suitcase. Its stride was his stride, its shoulders his own. When it lifted its head, Adrian saw himself. The other version smiled late, as though receiving instructions before the expression could form. Its eyes gleamed as though lit from behind by a lantern he could not see. He shut the window. The room had grown smaller, walls pressing in. The pulse of the floor overpowered his chest until his own heart followed its beat. On the dresser, the key had become a ledger. His name filled the page in careful ink, repeated with dates from years both past and future. The wardrobe coat swayed. It cast a shadow that didn't match its shape. The outline was his. The shadow raised a hand and tapped against the mirror, steady, insistent. Adrian backed toward the door, but the door no longer resembled an exit. It pulsed like a throat waiting to swallow. He sat on the bed. The indentation beside him deepened. The sheets stretched tight as if welcoming another arrival. The mirror's seam widened just enough to suggest a passage, though not one meant for escape. Adrian whispered, "Guest or memory?" His voice shook. The walls leaned closer, eager for the answer. From the ceiling, like agreement, came a single knock. The sound echoed inside his ribs, distorted than the last. He slammed the book shut, but his hands were shaking too hard. The weight of it felt wrong, heavier than any book should be. He dropped it, and when it struck the floor, it didn't sound like paper and leather. It sounded like flesh. The receptionist's eyes flicked downward, then back up to meet his. She spoke aloud now, her voice cheerful yet cold. "Would you like me to confirm your reservation, Mr. Adrian?" The ledger pulsed where it lay, as though veins throbbed beneath its cover. Slowly the binding split open, pages twitching like organs trying to breathe. Adrian could smell iron and rot. The book began to whisper, 100 overlapping voices spilling out, reciting names in a relentless chant. His name repeated louder and louder, woven into the litany until it drowned everything else. "Stop it!" he cried, clutching his ears. But even in the darkness behind his eyelids, the ledger's pages burned bright, his name seared into every line. He tried to run, but his legs carried him in circles. Every turn of the lobby brought him back to the desk, the book, the receptionist's frozen smile. Finally, his body betrayed him. His hand reached for the pen lying next to the ledger. He fought against it, veins standing out on his arms as he resisted, but his fingers moved anyway. The nib scratched against the page with a screech. Adrian looked down in horror as his own hand wrote again. Adrian, room 218, permanent resident. The pen fell from his grasp. His breath stopped. The lobby flickered, its colors draining to black and white. The receptionist leaned closer, her eyes now hollow sockets, though the smile remained painted across her face. "Thank you for updating your file," she said softly. Adrian tried to scream, but no sound came. His reflection in the lobby mirror tilted its head at him, expression mismatched, and whispered the words he could not. "You never checked in. You were written in." Adrian left room 218 with the echo of that knock still clinging to his ribs. The corridor outside stretched longer than before, lined with faded wallpaper the color of old bone. A faint scent of turpentine and dust hovered in the air. At first he thought the hallway empty, until he noticed the frames. Dozens of portraits lined the walls, each in gilded frames dulled by tarnish. The subjects were former guests, perhaps, or people who wanted to be remembered here. Their clothing suggested another century, stiff collars, feathered hats, lace gloves. But their eyes were startlingly alive, painted with such precision that they glistened as though wet. As Adrian walked, he felt them turn, not with sudden motion, but with the heavy patience of something ancient, deliberate. He stopped before one canvas. The plaque beneath it read only, "Mr. A, room 218. The man in the portrait looked almost like him, but older, shoulders slumped, smile hesitant. Adrian's stomach tightened. The man's gaze shifted a fraction too late, trailing his own movements with the precision of a predator. He quickened his pace. Each step carried him deeper, yet the hallway did not end. More portraits appeared, dozens then hundreds. Some faces blurred, painted with smears instead of features. But the eyes were always intact, luminous, and watching. Others looked frozen in mid-scream, teeth flecked with brushstrokes of black. In one, a woman cradled a child, but the child's hands pressed against the canvas as though from inside, smearing pigment outward. The air thickened. He thought he heard breathing behind him, but it was only the frames rattling gently against the wall. The whispers began as he passed the midpoint of the corridor. First soft, like paint settling, then clearer, "Stay painted." His name surfaced among them, stretched across multiple mouths in imperfect chorus. He covered his ears, but the sound only grew sharper inside his skull. One portrait was draped in cloth. His hand moved before he could resist, tugging it aside. Beneath lay an unfinished painting. His own face, the eyes hollow, the mouth only a pale sketch. A brush leaned against the frame, tip wet with red paint, thick, fresh, and dripping as if from a wound. The smell was iron, not oil. He dropped the cloth in horror. The canvas twitched once, as though something inside had shifted, straining toward completion. He tried to keep walking. The corridor narrowed, forcing his shoulders to brush the frames. Each surface rippled at his touch, paint bending like thin skin. He pulled back, trembling as faces pushed forward, noses flattening against invisible glass. Their mouths opened silently, mouthing words he could not hear but felt inside his chest, synchronized with his heartbeat. At the far end, one massive portrait dwarfed the others. Its frame was carved with twisting shapes that refused to stay still. The canvas depicted the hotel lobby, the reception desk, the lamp, the clock frozen at midnight. At first, the chair behind the desk was empty. Then brushstrokes moved on their own, sketching a figure into existence. The receptionist appeared. His smile painted stroke by stroke until it gleamed too wide. Slowly, impossibly, he turned his head within the portrait to look directly at Adrian. The floor lurched. Adrian staggered back, colliding with other portraits. They shivered violently, eyes rolling, mouths forming his own thoughts before he could think them. He glimpsed himself dozens of times, unfinished, half-painted, captured mid-breath. Some versions smiled when he did not, some frowned, some simply stared. One frame rattled harder than the rest, the unfinished Adrian pounding against the canvas, leaving red smears across the inside of the glass. The whispers became a chant. "Stay painted, stay!" Frames tilted, leaning closer, eager to swallow him into their gallery. He sprinted down the corridor, lungs burning. The air tasted of dust and copper. Behind him, he heard frames tearing free of the walls, dragging themselves forward with groaning hinges. Fingers of paint stretched toward him, wet and grasping. As he ran, one frame crashed to the floor with a sound like shattering bone. He risked a glance and saw paint leaking from the broken canvas, thick and dark, crawling across the carpet toward his shoes. The smell of oil and rot grew so strong it burned his throat. For one dizzy second, he imagined he was already hanging among them, his face immortalized, his eyes forever following strangers down the hall. He touched his cheek, half expecting pigment to smear under his fingers. Finally, a door appeared on his left, faint light seeping through its cracks. He yanked it open and threw himself inside, slamming it shut just as the portraits began to moan. Darkness enveloped him, cool and damp. The air smelled sharply of alcohol, medicine, and rusted iron. A brass plaque glimmered faintly in the dark. Adrian leaned on the door until the sound of rattling frames faded. His breath fogged in the chill. A plaque caught his eye, tarnished but legible. Hospital wing. The letters seemed carved deeper than metal should allow, as though the word itself weighed down the door. The corridor stretched ahead, narrow and sickly lit. The plaster sagged in strips, and beneath it, the brickwork sweated moisture like pores. The air was sharp with alcohol long soured, the mold of decades, and a metallic tang that stung his tongue. It reminded him of waiting rooms from childhood fevers. Only here the smell clung to the back of his throat, as if inhaled from lungs not his own. The silence pressed harder than noise. He moved slowly, each step echoing too long. A door labeled Observation Room stood on his left. Its window had been painted black from within, but faint scratches traced the glass. Tap pause. Tap Adrian's hand hovered over the handle before he forced it away. Whatever waited inside could keep waiting. Further along, a gurney blocked his path. Its wheels were rusted, leather straps frayed. Stains mottled the surface, some dark, others darker. He leaned close, and the straps coiled tight with a sharp snap, buckling against air. The gurney trembled once before lying still again. Adrian backed away, pulse racing. He passed another door. Surgical theater. He pushed it open a fraction. Inside, rows of seats curved around a central table bathed in yellow light. Empty benches stared down like silent witnesses. But on the floor, shadows slithered though no bodies cast them. They recoiled when he looked too long. He closed the door with shaking hands. The hallway narrowed. Charts papered the walls, edges curling, ink smeared. One by one, they bore his name, Adrian, followed by dates he did not remember living. Some were neat, others frantic, as though written mid-panic. He tried to rip one down, but the paper dissolved into dust in his fingers, reforming seconds later. The wall wanted the record intact. A vent hissed above, exhaling warm air. But in it rode words, shaped and precise. Lie down. Another gust. Be cured. He pressed his palms to his ears, but the voice grew louder inside his skull, buzzing like fever. He stumbled forward until a new door appeared, unmarked except for a plate reading Treatment in Progress. Inside, the light was weak and greenish, filtered through grimy glass. Beds lined both sides. Shapes lay beneath sheets, rising and falling with shallow breaths. Adrian approached one. The sheet slipped, and his own face stared back, pale, twitching, lips whispering fevered fragments. He staggered to another, again his face older, bruised, hair falling out. Bed after bed revealed him, altered and broken. Dozens of Adrians slept in this place, every breath syncing with his own until the room pulsed like one great lung. The whispers rose together. The doctor is not done. Their mouths moved in unison, eyes shut tight, yet every voice came from inside Adrian's chest. His vision swam. A figure shifted in the far corner. A white coat too long, dragging across the floor. Gloves crimson, fingers flexing slowly. Where a face should be, pieces of metal glinted, straps tightening as though to hold something caged inside. The figure waited, head tilted, patient as a surgeon before incision. Adrian stumbled into a tray. Tools gleamed in neat order, scalpels, clamps, a bone saw. They smelled not of rust, but of wet iron. He reached to push the tray away, but his hand stuck, gluey, as though the metal had grown skin. He wrenched free, palm burning. When he looked, the tray was spotless again. The bed stirred, eyes opened one by one, all his. Voices layered, "It only hurts once, let us finish." Adrian clutched his head, but the chant threaded through his bones. For one delirious instant, he saw himself lying down, allowing the straps to hold him, scalpels descending with clinical love. Peace flickered there, a cure he did not believe in yet almost wanted. The figure moved at last, one step only, slow and sure. The lamp above flickered. Darkness swallowed the room. In that brief blindness, something cold and sharp brushed his arm, precise, deliberate. The contact lingered just long enough to feel like promise. When the light returned, the room was empty. Beds bared air sterile. Only a clipboard remained on the tray. His name filled the top line. Beneath it, treatment incomplete. Adrian staggered to the wall, desperate for escape. His palm met a handle he swore hadn't been there before. He pulled. Doors yawned open. An elevator waited, lights dim, cables humming. It stood open like a throat, patient, expectant, and it waited only for him. The elevator doors stood open as if they had been expecting him. Adrian lingered at the threshold, stomach knotting. The light inside flickered dimly, buzzing in an unnatural rhythm, like a dying insect refusing to stop. The air within was colder than the hallway, stale as though no one had breathed it for decades. Yet it pulsed faintly, as if the chamber itself inhaled and exhaled. Adrian stepped in. The floor vibrated beneath his shoes, metal humming with a low resonance that crawled up through his bones. The panel of buttons stretched before him, but the labels were wrong. Numbers that should have read 1, 2, 3 and were smudged, replaced with scratches, symbols that meant nothing or meant too much. He squinted, and for an instant thought he recognized his own handwriting carved into one of the plates. He pressed the button closest to where lobby should have been. Nothing lit up, the doors slid shut without sound. The hum deepened, resonant and steady. He felt it in his ribs, in the hollow of his skull. The elevator began to move, but he could not tell if it rose or sank. His stomach lurched both ways at once. The panel flickered. For a moment, words replaced the symbols. Treatment resumed. He blinked, and the words were gone. Only scratches remained. He pressed another button, desperate. The doors opened, not to the lobby, not to any floor he recognized. The hallway beyond was narrow, wallpaper flaking, dim with a single bulb. He almost stepped out, until he realized the hall was shorter than the length of his body, as though it would crush him if he entered. He retreated. The doors closed soundlessly. The hum continued, steady as a heartbeat. Adrian leaned against the wall. His reflection stared back faintly in the brass paneling, but it didn't follow his movements. When he tilted his head, the reflection stayed still. Its mouth curled faintly into a smile. Then, after a pause, the reflection mimicked his tilt, just slightly delayed, as if learning how to be him. He stepped away, bile rising. Another jolt. The elevator stopped again. Doors opened. This time, a staircase stretched downward into dark water. The steps descended into blackness, no railing, no end. Water lapped faintly at the first step, reflecting nothing. A distant splash echoed, too deep and too far away. Adrian's chest tightened. He pressed the button again, slamming it. The doors closed mercifully, though he thought he saw something rise just beneath the waterline as they shut. The hum deepened, then shifted. It pulsed now, slower, like breathing. His ears popped. He felt pressure, as if buried beneath the building. Sweat ran down his neck. He closed his eyes, whispering that it was only an elevator, only machinery. Yet the air vibrated with whispers threaded into the hum. They spoke his name, stretching it across syllables. Adrian. Each repetition bent the sound further from human tongue, as though the machine was practicing until it became fluent. The doors opened again, the lobby. Relief surged, until he realized something was off. The desk sat empty. The chandelier above dripped light too slowly, each droplet a second out of time. Chairs lined the walls, but their occupants were motionless, blurred, like half-painted figures waiting for someone to finish them. He stepped forward and the doors slammed shut on their own, trapping him once more. He pounded the panel. None of the buttons responded. Instead, new ones appeared, etched where none had been. 218, basement, below. His finger hovered. The hum urged him. He pressed below. The descent was immediate. His knees buckled. The lights flared, then dimmed until only shadows remained. His reflection in the panel grinned now, wide, unbroken. It mouthed words he did not speak. We are already here. He turned away, fists clenched, but the reflection remained clear in the corner of his eye, too sharp to ignore. The elevator stopped. The doors opened onto a chamber without walls, only endless dark. A single lantern swung from a beam above, casting circles of light that revealed nothing beyond their edge. Adrian stepped back. The lantern swayed, though no wind stirred. The hum ceased. Silence fell so deep it roared in his ears. Then the doors closed again without his command. The elevator resumed its endless journey, deeper or higher, he could no longer tell. The hum returned, slower, like a pulse synced with his own. He touched his chest and felt the rhythm match perfectly. And he realized, with sudden dread, that the elevator wasn't carrying him anywhere. It was waiting for him to understand where he already was. Adrian's descent into the basement felt like walking into another century. The stairwell smelled of mold, iron, and something sharper. Chemical, caustic, as if the very air had once been used to sterilize wounds and had never been replaced. The door behind him creaked shut on its own, swallowing the faint light from above, leaving only the weak glow of bulbs that flickered as if unsure whether to stay alive. The room stretched wider than the hotel should have allowed. Racks of bottles lined the damp stone walls, amber, green, and clear glass, filled with liquids that shifted sluggishly when the air moved. Each was labeled in the same looping handwriting, but the words blurred when Adrian tried to read them. Ether, formalin, laudanum. He blinked and suddenly the labels looked like names. Thomas, Mary, Henry. He rubbed his eyes, but the letters refused to resolve. Rusting tables sat at odd angles, their wheels frozen in place. Scalpel handles and forceps were scattered across them, catching the trembling light. On one table lay bones, small enough to be a child's, arranged neatly, almost lovingly, as if someone had been studying how to put them back together. Beside them, jars of organs floated in viscous fluid, their shapes distorted as if caught between life and dissolution. A sound leaked into the silence. Dripping water. No, not water. Each drop rang too clearly, like the tick of a clock marking time in a room where time should not move. Adrian followed the sound deeper, his breath loud in his ears. Then came the whisper, faint but certain, coiling through the basement. "We can cure you too." The words threaded around him, impossible to locate. He spun, but every corner of the room looked the same. Shadows bending around old gurneys, curtains stiff with decades of dust, stains too dark to identify. His heart pounded. Who was whispering? Or was it the jars themselves, releasing voices from long-dead throats? A ledger lay open on a central desk, its pages yellowed and curling. Adrian reached for it with trembling fingers. The ink was faded, yet still legible. Lists of patients, dates, treatments. He traced a line with his fingertip until he froze. Near the bottom, written in sharper ink than the rest, a name appeared. Adrian. Pending treatment. He staggered back. He had never signed anything. Yet the page looked older than him. Behind him, glass clinked. One of the bottles tipped forward, spilling liquid that spread across the floor in a slow, creeping pool. The smell hit him, sharp, sweet, rotting, and suddenly the other bottles began to tremble, their contents vibrating like heartbeats. The whispers grew louder, overlapping voices in languages he couldn't understand. He covered his ears, but the sound came from inside his skull. Adrian stumbled toward the stairs, but the stairwell was gone. Where the door should have been, there was only another row of cabinets filled with more bottles, more bones, more instruments, waiting for hands that hadn't aged. His pulse thundered. He ran along the wall, searching for a seam, a crack, any sign of escape. But the basement shifted subtly with each step, stretching farther like the hotel itself was reshaping to keep him there. A curtain fluttered without wind. Behind it, a figure stood draped in a white coat. The face was obscured by shadow, but the outline of surgical goggles gleamed faintly. In one hand, the figure held a scalpel. In the other, a lantern that pulsed like a beating heart. It didn't move toward him. It simply stood, waiting, as though Adrian had finally arrived for an appointment. His throat tightened. Was this another guest? A ghost, or simply the hotel feeding on his own reflection of fear? Adrian took a step back, and the ledger on the desk flipped its own pages. The whisper coalesced into words he could finally understand. "Lie down. We've been expecting you." Adrian's knees threatened to buckle. The bones on the table rattled faintly as though excited. The lantern's glow spread across the jars, and for a moment he swore the organs inside twitched, straining toward him. He clutched his head, willing himself to wake, to force the scene to collapse. But the room only grew sharper, more vivid, more real. His name echoed again from the walls, louder, insistent. Adrian. Adrian, Adrian. The last bulb overhead flared and went out. The basement sank into near darkness, lit only by the lantern's rhythmic glow. And in that beat, between light and shadow, Adrian realized the whispers weren't asking. They were instructing. His treatment had already begun. Adrian staggered back from the desk, heart hammering. The basement's stale air clung to his lungs when he saw her, at the end of a hallway that hadn't existed before. A pale silhouette drifted forward, slow and certain, as though time itself bent to make space for her. She wore a patient's gown, the fabric yellowed and frayed, trailing across the ground with a whisper like pages turning. Her long black hair fell forward in tangled ropes, covering her face. But beneath it, a mouth glimmered faintly, curved, thin, and smiling. It was the only feature visible, and it seemed to glow unnaturally in the dark. Adrian froze. She raised her hand in greeting, palm outward, movements too deliberate, too slow. The lantern sputtered, then went out. Darkness devoured the corridor, leaving only her gown faintly luminous like cloth spun from bone dust. She slid closer without sound. His body refused his commands, his legs heavy, as though invisible restraints kept him still. The air grew bitterly cold. Frost crawled across the stones, spiderwebbing outward with sharp cracks. Adrian's breath fogged in front of him, each exhale sounding louder than his own heartbeat. The sharp stench of antiseptic rose layered with iron, blood, metallic and raw. When she stopped a few feet away, he saw that where her face should be was only skin, blank and smooth. Except for the smile widening in mockery of expression. He pressed against the wall, but the plaster pulsed faintly beneath his hand as if it were flesh. She tilted her head, then slowly extended her arm toward the desk. The ledger pages riffled in a phantom wind. More names bled onto the paper, one after another. At the bottom, Adrian, under observation. The ink spread across the fibers like a wound opening wider. "I didn't write that," he whispered. The sound seemed to vanish before it reached the air. The woman leaned closer. From within her gown came muffled cries, voices layered atop one another, groans and fragments of words that dissolved before clarity. It was as if the gown itself was woven from the suffering of countless others. Her smile widened further, and a thought intruded into Adrian's mind, sharp as a scalpel. "You've already checked in." He staggered. When he blinked, she was gone. The corridor stood empty, Frost retreating, shadows sinking back into silence. Only the ledger remained, his name still pulsing on the page. Adrian pressed his chest. His heartbeat vanished for one terrifying second. Then it returned, frantic, as if beating in someone else's body. A door creaked open. Adrian turned, dread dragging at his muscles. Beyond it stretched a white hospital ward. The smell of bleach stung his nose. A single bed stood under a humming light. A patient lay beneath a thin sheet, chest rising and falling. Against his will, Adrian walked closer, feet scraping the floor. The sheet shifted with a breath that carried his voice. His stomach twisted. He pulled the sheet back. The face staring up was his own. Adrian stumbled, nearly falling. The room flickered, sterile white walls dissolving into cracked plaster, then reforming. Two realities overlapped until he could no longer tell which was solid. In the corner, the woman in white reappeared, watching him, her faceless head cocked like a nurse waiting to record his response. The whispers filled the room again, voices layering into a rhythm that sounded like his pulse. Observation. 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 He covered his ears, but the voices were inside, echoing through his bones. The light above sputtered, buzzing louder. Adrian tried to speak, to scream, but his throat clenched shut. The patient bed was suddenly empty. The whispers stopped. Silence pressed down like weight. Adrian turned toward the dark window. His reflection looked back, except it wasn't him. The figure in the glass wore the same tattered gown, mouth curling in that impossible smile. Slowly, deliberately, it raised its hand in greeting, palm outward, exactly as she had done. He stumbled away from the glass, heart slamming, but the reflection did not follow. It remained, hand lifted, smile steady. His vision blurred with tears, but he couldn't look away. The words surfaced again, not whispered this time, but carved into his mind with certainty. Under observation. Permanent. The corridor shuddered. The lights dimmed. Adrian's breath came ragged as he realized the hotel was no longer simply a place. It was a ward, a prison, and he was not a guest passing through. He was the patient. And somewhere behind the walls, unseen doors opened, releasing footsteps that began to close in. The treatment was ready to continue whether he consented or not. The silence after the whispers was unbearable. Adrian staggered down the hallway, every step echoing too loudly until he found himself back at the hotel's lobby. It should have been comforting, familiar. The grand chandelier, the polished counter, the faint smell of dust and wood polish. Yet everything had shifted. The chandelier swayed without motion, and the shadows beneath the chairs pulsed faintly, as though breathing. The receptionist still stood behind the desk. Her smile had not changed, but her eyes glinted as if she had been waiting, not for hours, but for decades. Without speaking, she slid something across the counter, a leather-bound book, ancient, swollen from moisture and time. The spine cracked as Adrian opened it. It was the guest ledger. The ink of the earliest names had bled into the paper, almost illegible. As he turned the pages, the handwriting became clearer, more modern. Each name was neatly listed with its room number and date of arrival. But Adrian noticed something chilling. There were no departures. Every line ended abruptly, as if the guests had never left. His throat tightened as he flipped faster. The names kept coming. Elizabeth, room 311. Thomas, room 104. Margaret, room 506. Some he thought he recognized, though from where he couldn't recall. The letters seemed to vibrate on the page, quivering as though alive. The ink shimmered wet, fresh, like it had only just been written. And then he saw it. At the bottom of the most recent page, his own name stood there in stark black. Adrian, room 218. His stomach lurched. His signature curved exactly the way he always signed it, down to the tilt of the letters. But he hadn't signed it. He was sure of it. Yet the more he stared, the more it looked like something he must have done. The muscles of his hand twitched, remembering the motion of the pen, though he had no memory of holding one. He shut the book, trembling. But the receptionist gently pushed it open again with her manicured hand. The page had changed. Now there was an additional line below his name. Under observation, status pending. Adrian stumbled back, shaking his head. "That wasn't there before," he shouted. His voice echoed strangely, splitting into two tones, his own and another deeper, rasping version it. The receptionist tilted her head, her smile widening just slightly. "Sir, you must understand," she whispered, though her lips never moved. The words formed directly in his skull. "No guest ever departs without treatment. Some sooner, some later, but all are documented." The chandelier above rattled violently, dust cascading down. Adrian grabbed the ledger again, desperate, flipping pages backward, his breath caught. Interspersed among the names were faint sketches, barely visible outlines of faces, as though the ledger itself had absorbed their likeness. Some of the faces looked terrified, others calm, resigned. And in between, he swore he saw his own reflection staring back. Dozens of versions of himself, each more distorted than the last. He slammed the book shut, but his hands were shaking too hard. The weight of it felt wrong, heavier than any book should be. He dropped it, and when it struck the floor, it didn't sound like paper and leather. It sounded like flesh. The receptionist's eyes flicked downward, then back up to meet his. She spoke aloud now, her voice cheerful yet cold. "Would you like me to confirm your reservation, Mr. Adrian?" The ledger pulsed where it lay, as though veins throbbed beneath its cover. Slowly, the binding split open, pages twitching like organs trying to breathe. Adrian could smell iron and rot. The book began to whisper, 100 overlapping voices spilling out, reciting names in a relentless chant. His name repeated louder and louder, woven into the litany until it drowned everything else. "Stop it!" he cried, clutching his ears. But even in the darkness behind his eyelids, the ledger's pages burned bright, his name seared into every line. He tried to run, but his legs carried him in circles. Every turn of the lobby brought him back to the desk, the book, the receptionist's frozen smile. Finally, his body betrayed him. His hand reached for the pen lying next to the ledger. He fought against it, veins standing out on his arms as he resisted, but his fingers moved anyway. The nib scratched against the page with a screech. Adrian looked down in horror as his own hand wrote again. Adrian, room 218, permanent resident. The pen fell from his grasp. His breath stopped. The lobby flickered, its colors draining to black and white. The receptionist leaned closer, her eyes now hollow sockets, though the smile remained painted across her face. "Thank you for updating your file," she said softly. Adrian tried to scream, but no sound came. His reflection in the lobby mirror tilted its head at him, expression mismatched, and whispered the words he could not. "You never checked in. You were written in." Adrian left the lobby in a half-run, his lungs burning, the sound of his name still rattling inside his skull. Every corridor twisted into another, wallpaper peeling, lamps buzzing faintly as if on the edge of dying. He wasn't too sure whether the hotel was guiding him or whether his own panic carried him back toward the door of room 218. The brass numbers gleamed under the dim hall light. He froze. He didn't want to go back inside, yet his key weighed heavy in his pocket, pulsing against his thigh like a heartbeat. With trembling hands, he unlocked the door. The room was exactly as he had left it, or almost. The bedspread was folded too neatly, the curtains were drawn, though he remembered leaving them open, and the mirror in the corner seemed larger than before. Adrian forced himself to look away, dropping into the chair near the desk, rubbing his temples. His head buzzed, thick with exhaustion and fear. Then the first knock came, a hollow thud, muffled from inside the wardrobe. Adrian's head snapped up. He waited, breath caught in his throat. Silence. Just as he began to convince himself it had been the building settling, another knock followed, harder this time. Thud, thud, thud. His mouth went dry. Slowly, he approached the wardrobe. Each step made the knocking louder, more insistent, like fists pounding from within. He raised his hand to the handle but froze, his reflection in the wardrobe's polished wood shifting slightly out of sync. It smiled faintly, though his own lips were pressed tight in fear. Adrian yanked the door open. Nothing. Only a tall mirror stood inside, stretched from floor to ceiling, its frame ornate and dustless, as though it had been waiting. His own reflection stared back, but not quite. The eyes were too dark, and when Adrian raised his hand, the figure lagged a second before following. He turned his head left. The reflection turned right. Then, slowly, the reflection began to move on its own, even as Adrian stood still. It knocked. The sound reverberated inside the glass, a hand within the mirror pressing flat against the surface from the other side. Adrian staggered back, heart hammering. His reflection leaned closer, tilting its head with unnatural curiosity. Its lips parted, and though no sound emerged, Adrian felt words forming inside his skull, heavy and undeniable. "Let me out." He shook his head violently, clutching his temples. "No, you're not me," he whispered. His voice quivered. The reflection's smile widened, baring teeth too sharp. Too many. It lifted its hand and knocked again, louder, shaking the mirror's frame. Thud. 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 The walls of the room trembled with each impact. The ceiling light flickered, shadows crawling across the walls. Adrian stumbled to the door, fumbling for the handle, but the door no longer opened. His reflection watched him with something like amusement, tapping its finger against the inside of the mirror as if counting down. "Stop!" Adrian shouted. His fists pounded against the door, but the wood absorbed the blows like clay. Behind him, the knocking became a frenzy, the reflection slamming against the glass, cracks spiderwebbing outward. Yet the glass didn't shatter. Instead, the cracks writhed alive, like veins crawling across the surface. Adrian forced himself to look again. The reflection wasn't alone anymore. Behind it, crowding the mirrored space, were dozens of pale figures, their faces blurred, their bodies twitching as though caught mid-motion. They all pressed their hands to the glass, knocking in unison, begging silently to be released. Their mouths moved, but only Adrian could hear the words in his mind. "Join us. You already belong here." He clutched his chest, his heartbeat erratic. The mirror pulsed with each knock, vibrating like a living organ. Adrian backed into the corner, shaking his head, whispering, "This isn't real. This isn't real." But even as he said it, he realized the knocking had matched the rhythm of his own heartbeat. One final crack split the mirror, running directly across his reflection's face. The reflection leaned forward, pressing its lips against the glass. For a breathless second, Adrian swore he felt the warmth of that breath against his skin. then silence. The knocking stopped. The figures withdrew into the darkness of the mirror, leaving only his reflection once more. Perfect. Motionless. Adrian dared to breathe again, his chest aching. He reached out tentatively, fingertips brushing the cold surface. His reflection copied him exactly this time. But as he leaned closer, he realized one detail hadn't returned to normal. The reflection was still smiling. Adrian burst from room 218 into a corridor that seemed to stretch upward, his lungs aching, ears still haunted by phantom knocks. He didn't recall choosing stairs, but his feet climbed anyway, spirals of iron that grew colder with every turn. Each step groaned like an exhausted breath, echoing too long, as if the staircase itself resented his weight. The higher he rose, the less air filled his chest, until each inhalation scraped like glass. At last, he reached a warped wooden door. Its surface bore gouged words, shaky but deliberate. Exit to rooftop. The letters looked carved not with tools but fingernails. The brass handle burned cold under his palm. He hesitated, then shoved it open. Night air struck him sharp and sterile like entering a freezer. He stumbled onto gravel slick with dew. Above, no moon, no stars, only a black canvas that swallowed even imagination. He turned, expecting the dim outline of the town. But there was nothing. Streets, hills, lights, all erased. The hotel stood alone in void. Except for one thing, the lantern. It hung crooked from a splintered beam at the roof's center. Its glow wasn't warm, but leaching, draining color from the gravel until everything looked gray. The lantern swayed in still air, deliberate, pendulum-like, ticking down a clock unseen. Within its fogged glass, shapes stirred too quickly to grasp, hands pressing, faces flickering, shadows colliding. Each movement thudded against Adrian's chest like an echo of his own heartbeat. Whispers bled from it, not sound, but thoughts. Step closer. You've stood here before. You belong to the light that takes. He approached, despite dread rooting his stomach. The glass was numb against his fingertips, colder than ice, and when he touched it, his breath fled. Images slammed into his skull. Corridors collapsing inward, the lobby warping into bone, the ledger's pages bleeding names that screamed. He stumbled back, gagging, but the lantern steadied as if mocking his weakness. He spun toward the stairwell. Gone. Only endless rooftop stretched where the door had been. The void pressed closer. The lantern's glow deepened. Shadows crawling across gravel like veins. The whispers thickened. Look down, Adrian. His body obeyed. At his feet, darkness spiraled into windows of another world. Streets below stretched empty, lined with hollow buildings, windows agape like skull sockets. Figures drifted, dozens, hundreds, walking endless circles. Their faces blurred, drained, yet disturbingly familiar. Adrian's stomach turned as recognition struck. Names from the ledger. Elizabeth Thomas. Margaret. They had been waiting. The shadows climbed his boots like liquid smoke, tugging him closer to the edge. Below, the figures slowed, tilting heads upward in eerie unison. Their eyeless sockets locked onto him, mouths opening not in screams but anticipation. Silent hunger radiated from them, a pull heavier than gravity. Adrian staggered back, shaking his head. No, he whispered, his voice cracked. But the lantern's beam locked across his chest like a spotlight. The chorus surged. Jump! The rooftop is not the end, it is the beginning. His legs lurched forward against his will. Gravel shifted beneath him, scraping under his boots as he neared the parapet. His mind screamed, but his muscles obeyed another will. He gripped the stone edge until knuckles whitened. Below, faceless arms rose, beckoning. The lantern cracked, glass splitting, spilling shards of pale light. In its flare, Adrian saw his reflection within. Not monstrous, but tired, resigned, lips mouthing, "You were always meant to stay." He felt his grip falter, sweat slick against stone. The void tilted, horizon bending until sky and earth were meaningless directions. "Stop!" he begged, though his voice was a ghost in the windless air. His body leaned forward. The world narrowed to the pull below. Gravel slid beneath his boots, tumbling into the dark, but never landing. Then silence. The lantern froze mid-sway. The whispers ceased. The figures vanished. Adrian blinked, trembling, heart hammering like a trapped animal. He was back at the roof's center, the lantern above him, steady, calm. The city was gone, only void remained. Even the air seemed afraid to move. He dared to breathe. Maybe it was over. Maybe he had resisted. Then he saw it. Across the roof, in the same pale glow, another figure stood. His own form, same clothes, same stance, same face, but expression blank, eyes hollow, waiting. The lantern flickered once like a single unseen blink, and both Adrians breathed at the same time. The other raised its hand slowly, deliberately, as if inviting him closer. And though Adrian's body refused to move, he felt the phantom weight of that gesture, pulling him across the gravel one invisible step at a time. Adrian's legs carried him down another corridor that had not existed minutes before. The rooftop was gone, replaced by sterile walls, tiled in yellowed white, reeking of antiseptic and rust. Fluorescent lights hummed, some flickering in epileptic rhythm, others glowing steady like unblinking eyes. He could feel the weight of the building shifting around him, hotel and hospital bleeding into each other until he no longer knew which one imprisoned him. At the end of the corridor stood a door with frosted glass. The words etched across its surface read, "Operating Theater." His breath hitched. No matter how far he'd run, every path circled back to treatment. His hand trembled as he pushed the door open. The room beyond was cavernous, yet suffocating. Cold metal tables, rusting trays of instruments, glass jars clouded with gray liquid. The smell was unbearable. Iron and decay beneath the sharp perfume of cleaning fluid. At the center waited a surgical table under a single cone of light, bright enough to blind but too narrow to reveal the corners of the room. Shadows clustered just beyond reach, twitching, whispering. Something lay on the table. A body, shrouded by a stained white sheet. Its chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, proving it was alive, though barely. Adrian's heart hammered. Each step closer was both chosen and forced, as if invisible hands guided his spine. A voice seeped from the shadows, too soft to place, too loud to ignore. The treatment is never finished. Every guest must complete their cure. The instruments rattled, scalpels spinning lazily in their trays, clinking like wind chimes. The sheet moved, a twitch, a breath, awaiting revelation. Adrian's fingers shook as he reached for the edge of the cloth. He whispered, "Please don't be me." His voice cracked into the stale air. He peeled the sheet back. The face beneath was his own. Pale lips parted, eyes closed as if in restless sleep. A mirror not bound to glass. The body on the table exhaled as he inhaled, perfect opposites. For a heartbeat, he felt air pass between them, a circulation of breath that fused both into one. He stumbled back, but the body sat up. Its eyes opened, his eyes, but darker, filmed with something ancient, like cataracts of memory. The double tilted its head, studying him with clinical detachment. Around its wrists gleamed surgical restraints, yet no chains held it. The figure smiled faintly, not cruelly, but knowingly, as though it had always been waiting for him to arrive. "You left me unfinished," it whispered, though its lips barely moved. The voice was not external, but rattled inside Adrian's skull. Every guest begins a cure, but few see it through. You ran from the lantern, from the ledger, from the knocks, but you cannot run from yourself. The scalpels trembled, rising slowly from their trays, orbiting the table like satellites. Light fractured across their blades, spraying fractured beams across the walls. Shadows bent and writhed, forming silhouettes of masked doctors, faceless nurses, attendants who never aged. They leaned in, watching, approving. The other Adrian swung his legs over the side of the table. Metal clanged beneath his bare feet. His movements were wrong, too fluid, as if gravity meant less to him. He stepped forward, each echo against the tiles sharp, final. Adrian pressed back until the cold wall met his spine, but there was no escape. The double reached out a hand. The fingers were long, nails stained with something darker than blood. Adrian froze. Every instinct screamed to run, but his body betrayed him, rooted to the spot. His chest rose and fell in unison with the figure, their breaths chained. "You know the cure," the double whispered. "Trade places one lies. One walks, balance restored." Its touch hovered near Adrian's face, a millimeter from contact. The air between their fingers crackled, skin humming like live wires. Adrian screamed, though no sound came. His throat locked, jaw stretched, but the air refused to carry his terror. The shadow doctors leaned closer, scalpels trembling with anticipation. The room pulsed, lights strobed. The smell of iron thickened until it choked him. Then, the sheet fell back across the table. The figure was gone. The body gone. Instruments still, silence pressed so heavy his ears rang. Only Adrian remained, standing in the surgical theater alone, trembling, drenched in sweat. Yet when he blinked, he caught the faintest reflection in the glass jars, himself still lying on the table, unmoving, chest rising and falling in endless sleep. He touched his own arm, unsure if flesh or illusion. The corridor behind him had vanished. The only door now bore new words etched into the frosted glass. Check out. His stomach turned, relief or doom, he couldn't tell. But his legs moved, carrying him toward the door, as if the treatment had already decided for him. Morning arrived, or so the clock in the lobby claimed. Adrian blinked against a pale light pouring through tall windows, though outside was not a sky but a white haze, empty and depthless. The hotel lobby looked unchanged, marble polished, chandeliers glimmering, but too quiet, every surface holding its breath. At the counter stood the same receptionist. His smile had not shifted since the first night, stretched thin, rehearsed. The pen in his hand scratched against a ledger Adrian swore he had already seen. "Good morning, Mr. Adrian," the man said, voice as smooth as glass. "Checking out, are we?" Adrian's throat felt dry. "Yes, I need to leave." He placed his trembling hand against the counter, half expecting it to sink through. Instead, it held firm, cold, and solid. "Of course," the receptionist replied. "We hope you enjoyed your stay." He turned the ledger toward Adrian. The last entry was a name written in fading ink. Adrian, room 218. Beneath it, a blank line waited. "If you'll just confirm your departure," the man said. "Sign here." Adrian gripped the pen. It felt heavier than it should, as though ink were made of iron. He hesitated. If he signed, would he be free or claimed? The pen twitched in his fingers, pulling toward the page. Forcing himself, he set it down. "No, I won't." The receptionist's smile never broke, but his eyes darkened. "Then perhaps you're not ready to leave." His voice was both kind and cruel, like a doctor explaining a terminal diagnosis. Adrian spun and bolted for the doors. Sunlight spilled through the glass panes, warm and promising. He slammed them open and froze. Beyond was not a street, not a town, not even void. It was the same lobby, same chandelier, same counter, same smile waiting for him. He staggered backward, nausea clawing up his throat. He had run forward, yet returned. Panic surged. He dashed for the side hallway, boots slamming against the tiles. The corridor stretched, bent, then twisted into a spiral until it spat him out again into the lobby. The receptionist glanced up, still writing. "Back so soon?" he asked pleasantly. Adrian screamed, shoving over chairs, slamming fists against walls. The building echoed hollow, but no damage stayed. Everything snapped back into pristine condition, as though the hotel rejected disorder. His voice cracked into silence, swallowed whole. Finally, he returned to the counter, panting, broken. The receptionist closed the ledger with a soft thud. "You see, Mr. Adrian," he said gently, "checkout is only granted when one has truly finished their stay. And you, I'm afraid, are far from finished." Something inside Adrian fractured. His vision blurred. He looked down. Ink smeared across his fingers, though he had not signed. Yet on the page, beneath his name, fresh letters appeared in neat cursive. Extended stay confirmed. The words glistened, wet, final. "No," Adrian whispered. "I didn't write that." His chest tightened. "I didn't." The receptionist slid the ledger away. "Guests rarely remember, but the hotel always keeps record." His grin widened impossibly until it seemed carved into his skull. Adrian stumbled backward. The lobby seemed to grow, ceilings stretching higher, walls retreating, doors multiplying. Every direction opened into another lobby, another counter, another receptionist waiting with the same unbroken smile. Infinite reflections of the same place, folding in on themselves like a hall of mirrors. He could not tell if he moved or stood still. In every mirrored lobby, behind every counter, the receptionist repeated in perfect unison, "Will you extend your visit, Mr. Adrian?" Their voices overlapped until words became a chant, a roar, a storm pressing against his ears. Adrian collapsed to his knees. The ink on his hands burned into his skin, etching the same words over and over. Extended stay. Extended stay. Extended stay. He clawed at his arms, but the writing only multiplied, crawling up his veins like black vines. The chandeliers above flickered. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw shapes hanging from them, guests, suspended, swaying gently, all wearing his face. He blinked, and they were gone. Or perhaps they were waiting for him to join. The receptionist's smile hovered closer now, though Adrian had not seen him move. The pen reappeared in Adrian's hand, pressed firmly between his fingers. His body trembled, every nerve screaming, but his hand lowered toward the ledger once more. "Will you sign, Mr. Adrian?" The voices chorused. Adrian's vision darkened at the edges. He stared at the blank line that had already been filled, yet seemed to wait for him again. The pen's tip touched paper. A single drop of ink fell, and the lobby went silent. No confirmation, no escape, only silence, deep and endless, like the moment before waking, or never waking at all.